government housing programs and tenant services, and what's at stake for these programs and services going into the city budget discussions. Tenant housing advocates have been lobbying for years for programs at the city level, as the city is the most accessible level of government. We actually achieved some level of success, and therefore we have something to lose. This is a meeting to try. This meeting is to try to make sure we don't lose. Housing Action Now is the sponsor of this forum and is a large network of organizations in the city of Toronto, including Planning Toronto, who help put most of this organization together. There are seniors groups, housing organizations, child welfare agencies, faith groups, legal clinics, tenant and anti-poverty organizations. Han believes that every person has a right to safe, affordable, and well-maintained housing. Han believes that the governments have a responsibility to do everything possible to implement creative measures for new housing and to preserve existing affordable housing. Government must help tenants understand and enforce their legal rights with respect to housing and to prevent eviction and homelessness wherever possible. Our panel members will speak about the various areas where the city is involved in housing and why this involvement is vital and unique and why we need to hang on to it. Our speakers are Beth Wilson, Social Planning Toronto. Beside her is Linsey MacPhee, Toronto Drop-In Network. Phil Nazar is the Toronto Christian Resource Centre. Michael Shapcott is from the Wellesley Institute. Joy Connelly, her freelance consultant, I understand.
Blogger, OpenWindow.com. That's my platform.
Okay. And Susan Gapka for Toronto Tenants for Social Housing. Okay. So after the speakers have finished, we will have questions and answers and full discussion of the issues. Thank you for being patient and holding your questions to that point. The first speaker is going to be Beth Wilson, and welcome back.
Try to not be in the way of the bulkhead. So how's that if I
Hold it close to your mouth.
how's that? How's that? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, I got it. Am I in the way of the Yes. You guys can log to you if they just push it.
It wouldn't be in the way if you stood behind Susan.
Thanks so much for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see so many people in the room that are concerned about the issues of housing and homelessness and what's happening with the city budget process. So we're really glad to have you here tonight. I work at Social Planning Toronto, and we're a community nonprofit organization that works around a range of social and economic justice issues. And I'm co-chair with Barb Hurd, Housing Action Now. Thank you. To the first slide. So I'm going to start things off by providing an overview of the city's role in the area of housing and homelessness, what is their jurisdiction, and talk a little bit about what's already been cut if we go back to the 2011 budget, and what's at risk when we think about what's been happening over the past year around the core service review. And people might think that the budget process for 2012 has already started. It actually doesn't start until Monday. And you wouldn't know it for all the discussion of cuts and privatization that's already been out there. And then I'll talk about the 2012 budget process and how you can get involved. So the next slide. So the City of Toronto, around housing and homelessness, there are many divisions that are working in these areas, and I've identified 4 in particular. And all of our speakers are going to speak to these issues, so I'm just going to touch on them briefly, and then others are really going to go into the depth of these, of this work. So the Affordable Housing Office of the City of Toronto is extremely important for facilitating the development of affordable housing in our city, and Phil and Michael are going to speak to that. The Municipal Licensing and Standards Division has officers that go into private, multi-residential dwellings, so high-rises, and look at repair and maintenance issues that tenants are facing. So funding in that area is extremely important. We have 10 long-term care homes in the city. We're only required to have one, and so right now there's a look around to whether the city wants to sell off those long-term care homes and what would be the implication of that. And shelter support and housing administration, there's a broad portfolio there, and Linsey is going to speak to some of that, as well as the piece around funding to nonprofit community organizations and the community grants. So nonprofit organizations like the Toronto Drop-In Networks that provide really important services to the community. And finally, around agencies, boards, commissions, and corporations. The Toronto Community Housing Corporation of the City of Toronto that works at arm's length from the city, and Joy and Susan are going to speak about TCHC, which is not so much a part of the 2012 budget, but we know there are very big issues that are happening right now with TCHC, so we're going to speak to those. And if we go to the next slide. So when we look at 2011 budget, I'm just going to highlight a couple of the cuts that were significant in the area of housing and homelessness. Last year they cut $100,000 from the Tenant Defense Fund, which included $75,000 to the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations for tenant support services, and $25,000 into the actual fund. So that work helped tenants who are facing above the guideline rent increases. So their landlords are saying, I'm going to increase it beyond the amount that is the guideline set by the provincial government, and this is my rationale for why. And then FMTA and the fund would help tenants to organize to fight that, and FMTA has been very effective in helping tenants to keep, to challenge those above the guideline rent increases. And one of the things that was said to the staff was, there was an attempt to get the $75,000 back on the council floor during the budget debate. It lost by 1 vote. So that tells us that we're pretty close. We need to push on our councillors really hard around these issues, but it's definitely, there's definite division around them. We know that about halfway through the year, the staff said, it's okay to cut the fund because we have enough money in the fund. And FMTA said it's not okay because we actually expect a big increase in above the guideline rent increases from landlords. And that's what happened. And so I believe the fund ran out about halfway through the year around June. So that was the impact of that. The next slide. So another piece that I wanted to mention from last year's budget was this savings, this sort of service efficiency piece where the city said we will deliver alternative models of shelter service, and it's for less than 100 residents who, instead of having people in the shelter system, they would have accommodation in hotels and furnished rooms. And some of the concerns around that are whether people are getting the services they need, are we seeing a kind of privatization in the shelter system, and is that a sign of things to come as well? The next slide cuts to the Ombudsman's office. And I think I skipped over that. So the Ombudsman's office takes complaints from residents about city services. And so if you go through all the regular channels and you're still having problems, you can go to the Ombudsman's office at the city. And it's an accountability office. And so the funding of that office, of course, impacts its ability to do the work that it needs to do. And I bring it up in the context of housing and homelessness homelessness because TCHC is within the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman's office. So if you were having problems with TCHC, you've gone through the complaints process, you could contact the Ombudsman's office for some kind of response. And the Ombudsman really said last year quite clearly that if council did what they were intending to do, it would constitute a major service cut. And you might remember the mayor first said there's not going to be any cuts, and then there's not going to be any service cuts, and then he started saying there's not going to be any major service cuts. And she was very specific in her language and said this is a major service cut, and that's what happened. That cut was put in place. And there was an attempt by Councillor Matlow to reverse that cut. It didn't come anywhere close to passing. There was also a reduction in 35,000 bed rates in family shelters, so there was a cut there. And then, so those are the ones that I identified as some of the more significant ones, but all divisions were directed to make budget cuts, as